And I thought, oh, that's a fascinating topic because it's not necessarily talking about artificial intelligence, but it's
AI is anything that doesn't work yet, and that it's AI until it becomes software. It's going to have a different node. We think that we're going to be the first of a class of so-called ambient AI.
like in the example I'm going to share. It says DNA computing and storage that moves its way through the cycle rather than I move through it.
What is the underlying pedagogical theory that underpins the approach that what difference do we need to make? How are we making that difference? And rather than just getting through a curriculum, and that being the case all over the place.
Welcome to Thinking Deeply about Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time-poor and enthusiasm-rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Dominic Bristow as we explore the Gartner Hype Cycle and what it might mean for schools in their decision-making with regards to new technologies. Dominic, it's great to have you here. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Yeah, no, it's been super busy for us recently, so it's great to be able to step out and do some thinking deeply.
Yeah, find some space for those things that get you out of the ordinary, so to speak. So, I mean, at our London conference, you delivered the keynote, and one element that stood out to me was what's known as the Gartner Hype Curve. And I thought, oh, that's a fascinating topic because it's not necessarily talking about artificial intelligence, but it's certainly adjacent, if not a very important element. So I thought maybe it would make sense to begin a bit with the definitions. If you had to describe the hype curve to a teacher, leader in a staff room, what's it actually describing?
So it's worth just saying that actually, there is a synonymity between the cycle and the curve, insofar as the cycle keeps going as technologies change, and often given the same name. But the curve, you can plot the trajectory of a single innovation, right? So we'll come to that in a second. It's worth also just saying that, you say at the moment it's talking about AI. It's been talking about AI for decades, but that's mostly because AI has been, in the words of one of my favorite analysts who's been big since the mobile, and .com days, whose name is Benjamin Benedict, sorry, and he basically says AI is anything that doesn't work yet, and that it's AI until it becomes software. So not long ago, we've been saying AI predictions, in Netflix choices, for example, but that's just software to us now. So actually, this curve has been plotting AI, for decades. It's just we're now calling AI real AI, actual AI. Anyway, so what we're looking at, I guess, is a way to plot the manifestation of our very human reaction to step changes in technology. So fundamentally, when there is an innovation trigger, as I think it's known in the original theory, when people come across this. And generally speaking, I think this, being a Gartner thing, it's plotted against industries, it's across companies, it's a societal level thing, and so there's partly the use of these technologies. Prominence could be what could be the y-axis, but equally there's also a really emotional piece behind it. And I think that's the most useful thing for the education context. And essentially, what we're doing is plotting how desirable maybe the technologies are because of how exciting the possibilities felt, the opportunity felt by people starting to engage with what they enable. Now, obviously, in education, that could have been, for example, interactive whiteboards. The IWB is being put into every classroom in the country as a good example of this. It's like, oh, it's going to change everything. Suddenly this will be the salve for proper education. And there was, this big peak, as you see in that curve, and then near the top, That would be the peak of inflated expectations, probably when the education era government was saying, get them everywhere. And then obviously as teachers realize that what they're still doing is just teaching lessons, and that actually, a PowerPoint with flash animations and buttons you can press for quizzing in them isn't going to change everything. And being able to show a film at the touch of a button rather than wheeling a TV screen in, it isn't going to change their practice much. Then suddenly you drop down to the trough of disillusionment. I'll come to this the last part of it in a minute, where it's the slow path up the so-called slope of enlightenment, up to the plateau of productivity. But just focusing on those two, it's very understandable that as a trajectory. We get really excited about things and use them more, lean into, and then maybe when we realize that they're not perfect or they're going to need some work, then actually it suddenly feels like it's not the shortcut that we thought it was going to be. There's no silver bullets, and we go, oh yeah, there's no silver bullets, and then suddenly, we're back in this trough. Now, obviously, the reaction to that emotional reaction of markets is that loads of money goes into stuff, and then no money gets put into stuff. Right? There's a boom and a bust. In schools, it's a fad, maybe, and you get a lot of instances of, I don't know. I always think of Plickers. I thought Plickers was going to change the world. So that was where you use you do some AFL in the classroom by casting your mobile or iPad camera across QR codes the kids are all holding up to do response, and I thought that was going to be everything. And then actually interactive whiteboards are just like, apart from recording it into a database, I thought it was going to be everything. But it was definitely a boom and a bust of that, because it was suddenly everywhere and everyone was using it, certainly in science for kind of low stakes questioning. It was a big deal for us. Anyway, and so that's, I think, it is very well understood by people. And what I think is particularly interesting before we look at what's now happening with the climbing out of the trough, what's particularly interesting about now is that it's not just one technology. So it's not like November 23 happened and suddenly, everyone suddenly went, November 23-ish, where, you could use GPT-4 and the vision model in a way, everybody theoretically had access to a multimodal model for roughly the first time. And, it didn't just stop there, did it? So you could plot the trajectory of everybody through the peak of enlightenment and the trough of disillusionment, and then working out ways that they're going to use it in their life that is actually productive, but a bit sort of in the middle here, not over optimistic and not too pessimistic. But then, of course, something changed, and Gemini was able to do a big context window, and then Anthropic came along and did such and such a thing, and suddenly, you've got. Now, I feel like image generation was a big deal, because I thought it was going to change. I was going to be using it all the time, and actually it just wasn't quite right. And I ended up, we pay very much still a human illustrator to do the work at Stylus, and just wasn't quite there. Whereas Nano Banana Pro, the new Gemini 3 grade image model, is just superb. It really is extraordinary and really can do. And they've just done an education illustration specific version, in fact, but it really can do a replacement of some of that. But because this kept happening, it means that we've got a hype curve on a hype curve on a hype curve, right? And you've got to keep replotting your dot. So when you're talking to school leaders, it's really difficult actually to know where people are. Teachers, obviously the same, but we spend a lot of the time talking to school leaders. And certainly when it comes to discussions that we're having so we're doing this work with the DfE at the moment, when you talk to them about policy, it does feel sometimes like, because we are so on the pulse and have to be, because we're updating models if we're using them and so on, it feels like sometimes the discussion, you're always translating a couple of steps backwards in terms of expectations and so on, and either trying to update the person you're talking to, or actually just translate back to where their expectations probably are. So in terms of what it means for education, I guess we'll go on and talk about this a bit more, but it's I've been saying from the beginning, and I guess I didn't realize how much I was going to continue thinking this was good advice, but it's been really solid since we inaugurated the company, really. You need to find the right level of confidence with these technologies and don't be overconfident or underconfident. We've got lots of school teachers who are reticent to even engage because they know that there are ways in which that they aren't perfect. I don't think that's the right way to go about it myself. And they may not have been through the peak of inflated expectations to get to the trough of disillusionment, actually, which definitely feels like at least the kind of hard fought and more realistic cynicism of really knowing the technologies well. But anyway, it might be that for either not engaging at all or because you've found lots of errors that you're in this kind of underconfident place. And then there's lots who are just powering off and using these technologies when in ways that look superficially to be really beneficial, but might not be. We were at this big conference at the beginning of last year and sat on a table where I said what Stylus was up to. Like we're trying to be really rigorous with our work and the educational underpinnings, but we're using AI to mark student writing. And he was like, "Oh, that sounds nice, cool, that's good for you. Yeah, we've sorted that." I was like, "Have you? Right, okay, cool. What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh yeah, so we've got a really techie NQT, and they've basically built this thing which will just mark any papers we put in." I was like, I mean, I can't tell you how much evidence we have of how dangerous that is. So anyway, I wonder where that person, I can't remember I can't remember where they were from, but I'd be very interested to hear their story because I imagine they were at the peak of inflated expectations.
It's strong J from the in-betweeners vibes, complete admit.
Right,
For sort of
exactly.
AI. Um, yeah, so I mean, so like Gartner, to my knowledge, they're paid by companies to describe phenomena, and so this is almost their interpretation of expectations. And I think, to be honest, for the purposes of this episode, I've almost had to reduce things almost to absurdity because, as you mentioned, even large language models, they have had their own multi multifaceted sort of cycle through this
Mm.
curve, but also when I use the word AI, I can't possibly describe one journey because, for instance, your Stylus is what would you call it? Almost like feedback, writing feedback. Would that be the name on the node if I were to throw it through, or is there a better way to describe it?
It's going to have a different node. We think that we're going to be the first of a class of so-called ambient AI, which is good enough, accurate enough, rigorous enough to be doing some work for you in the background so you don't have to look at it. But at the moment, yeah, I mean, either granular assessment or student feedback is definitely formative anyway.
Cool. I mean, actually, I could use that if you're saying ambient AI. I was speaking to Candida from Third Space, and they were talking about how their tutor system is agentic. So even those two distinctions alone on that level, and you could probably go further.
Yeah.
They're all in their own cycle. They're all in their own on curve, and possibly multiple times as the technology improves. So I really So for anyone listening, we're talking about our expectations over time. Not everybody gets to the plateau of productivity, but as leaders, as teachers, this is going to impact our emotional reaction to things, but also our decision making. I think so. Even though I admit that I've reduced this to almost absurdity. I think it's an important conversation because we're going to be going through this. Because I remember when Neil showed me ChatGPT for the first time, and like you say, it was I think October ish 23, November ish 23, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, the possibilities. And then, but I'm probably still in the trough of disillusionment if we're completely honest. But there are lots of different things I've seen that have piqued my interest in terms of possible longevity. And I think there are people are sort of products trying to fill the world that you guys are in, but I don't think they have done half the thinking that I know you guys have done. And so very interested to see your journey towards this ambience and the impact.
I would just, before we kind of carry on into any deeper questioning there, just add one small build to that initial definition, which is that, this curve is obviously really relevant and perhaps most understandable on an individual basis because we know our own experience. We know what it is to come across something for the first time, try it and find the error and literally feel disappointed, right? But actually, I think it's probably most insightful. And I guess what Gartner, as I sort of very briefly mentioned a minute ago, what they originally intended it for is more societal level. And actually, for us, the education sector is going to experience this journey as a whole, and that's going to be the most, substantial experiential change that teachers will have. So, when you say people won't necessarily reach the plateau of productivity themselves, I wouldn't necessarily expect everybody to with any new technology, but they're still obviously, they're using. People wouldn't have battled through the early internet and kind of worked out how to manually configure ports in order to communicate between computers, but we all benefit from the internet now. So, like, obviously, we will be at a point, I think, where potentially, certainly that's where we're going, but other providers are available. The ways in which we are working to be background support for schools, we're aiming for that plateau. And actually, if then teachers are then using that, then they will be there, and it will still be AI. It's just it won't be, sort of not as you know it sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the technology or the product that meets the plateau of productivity. So if we're imagining the curve, we're imagining it's the node with the, like in the example I'm going to share, it says DNA computing and storage that moves its way through the cycle rather than I move through as an individual. I
Okay.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean that's probably another conversation for with education because everybody's at such different points in their journey. The Department for Education probably becomes a proxy for us, and where they in turn, but for another day, because I know their safeguarding, for instance, has really improved over the last 12 months, and hopefully will continue to do
Yeah.
so.
It's really stringent now. Yeah. People are going to struggle with it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think that's better safe than sorry in some ways.
Amen. I mean, we couldn't agree more. We're in a fortunate position of being sort of already pre-compliant, if you know what I mean. So it's all those that are running chatbots that are going to have a problem there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, too right. So, yeah, I mean, maybe whenever Hannah comes back in, I'll throw a couple of safety questions your direction. If you've ever wished for a maths curriculum that truly made sense from one lesson to the next, one that connected ideas, built teacher confidence, and gave students a deep understanding of number, the story of mathematics might be exactly what you've been looking for. It's designed by classroom teachers, drawing on years of research into representation, reasoning, mathematical understanding, and it places professional development at the heart of the curriculum. Now, it's already being used in schools in the UK and around the world to transform mathematics teaching. You can take a short tour or learn more at alta-education.com/TSOM-overview. If we imagine a school is considering a new approach or product, what do you think the best questions they could ask are, before spending money or staff time, and perhaps trying to avoid confusing excitement with impact?
We see a lot of excited people. Um, and obviously, as a business owner, what you don't want to do is purposefully dampen their excitement. And yet, we've also done a lot of work on, over the years, change management generally and implementation of technologies and things in the education space since I left the classroom. Um, so, what are we asking? I mean, there's a few things. Firstly, and I don't know how to say this, so it doesn't sound like I'm saying that it is true of us necessarily. You can make your own decision on that, but the credentials of the team matter because there's a lot of people who are working because they know, like the number of people, and I'm not talking about anybody specific here, by the way. I'm really not. So if this does match anyone it's not for that reason, I promise. But there are people who, are just developers whose family, who has a teacher in the family or something, and they see it as a really good place to make a product. And with the best will in the world, if you're not co-creating with educators, and like even though we are half of our company at least, if not more, in fact, are are qualified teachers at all areas of the business, and even so, we spend a lot of energy engaging with schools. So if there isn't a strong education background, I'd say that's one thing you're looking out for. and being wary of. Even, and that's true up to the highest levels. I'm talking about big tech companies because they look at there's and it's quite hard not to, particularly when you are some of some bigger companies have the wherewithal and they go, what can we make rather than what should we make first. So that's the other thing. There's a where does it come from and why? I think that matters. So there's a sort of team and story credentials, but for the other, so for more established, like obviously, and this is very much a telling that is repeated elsewhere, and increasingly so with the advent of the EdTech Evidence Board and handful of others. We've been. I was actually talking to. I'm sure he won't mind me quoting him and saying I was talking to James Browning from Lift Schools recently, and he said that the EdTech sector is suffering from 15 to 20 years of promises. Um, that we collectively have been saying we're going to save your teachers time for a long time, and actually, for what it's worth, we're now in a position where these technologies might genuinely produce something completely game changing, but it's a bit boy cried wolf now. So it's tricky, and impact really matters. But obviously, impact's quite hard to prove, particularly for new companies. And a lot of the companies that are using these technologies best will be really new. So I would still say for established companies, if you don't have really clear impact and a lot of social proof and a lot of advocacy and so on, then yeah, it's definitely a red flag. But I think more importantly, though, is, and this will be true for everybody, and particularly for new companies, um, you've got to scratch the surface. You've got to get under the hood and ask the proper education questions. So for me, what is the underlying pedagogical theory that underpins the approach that the product or platform, company, service is trying to promulgate? What's their theory of change? Theory of change sort of in a sense has a technical term, but obviously it's quite self-explanatory. But really, what it is by what mechanisms of well-known and well-documented educational theory are you yourselves creating a theory of what benefit that you could provide and how? How will you know if that is successful? In what ways does the feature do that? The product do that, and so on. So that's a big part of it. And then generally, like I would characterize it as saying, show your workings. So we often talk about this, and it comes from a science teacher thing, right? Show your workings, don't just write the answer. And increasingly so, the big AI labs are talking about interpretability because actually they don't know how the models come up with their answers, right? And it's a really big deal. It's an ongoing problem for us. It's a big piece of knowledge work that's going into that everywhere. But within a product, clearly there's another thing which is about the level of transparency or obscurity, and if there's very very simply, what AI models are you using? Which models are you using? Where? There's all the kind of GDPR stuff, obviously, and then moving into intellectual property rights and now going into the safety framework. As you said, there's some classic questions that you have to have in a procurement process. And, some have good answers to that and some don't. But more importantly, you go, what AI models have you used and why? What is your evaluation process for the output? What happens when you see something that isn't right? Where is the human in the loop, if any? All these sorts of things. These are all deeply important now for procurement questions. We've got to upskill on that. And it's easy. That's the sort of thing you could easily, by the way, use ChatGPT to give you a set of questions to ask a company. But, we always say show your workings, because if a company or a product is not actively showing their workings, they probably don't have any.
Yeah, and then that is the kicker. I mean, you say you're asked ChatGPT, but I think there's you could turn that into a one pager. Maybe I'll do it on your behalf and send it across to you. So you can say, okay, here's your flow chart for if this then that.
I love it.
The
Yeah.
classic algorithm. Yeah, yeah. There's so much to think about, isn't there? And like you say, even with established companies who are all of a sudden changing their direction or making decisions, and why have they
They're not
decided?
built for using these technologies either. More established companies.
No, no, but we've seen that with, actually, I'm not going to mention it because I'm getting sued.
Naming no names.
We will just bleep that out so we get that. If you've ever finished an episode of Thinking Deeply about primary education and wanted to go further, to read more, think more, and connect ideas, hey, what you reading for is exactly where you should start. Each week, we curate the best thinking from across education, books that challenge assumptions, research that informs practice, and podcasts that broaden perspectives. From curriculum and pedagogy to sound leadership and international insights, it's your weekly companion for meaningful professional growth. And because we know teachers are time poor but enthusiasm rich, it's concise, evidence informed, and genuinely useful. Subscribe for free at thinkingdeeply.info. I mean, like this is it. AI tools are everywhere. This is me. This is the absurdist bit. Everything from lesson planning, feedback, administration, safeguarding, even tutoring. Like I said, with them, I was talking to Candido last couple of weeks ago. If we use the hype curve as a lens, where do you think this quote unquote AI, artificial intelligence in schools sits right now, and what can we expect next? And we talked about what artificial intelligence might look like. The step change. The monumental step change where it was a chatbot being responsive in the moment. But like, what do you think in terms of the curve? What do you think we're going to experience as a system if we are all collectively on this journey together?
Yeah. I mean, everyone's trying to be a futurist at the moment. And maybe it's already obvious from my approach to the level of confidence that you should be taking, which is like, somewhere in the middle. My wife and I have this joke about this. We go, as ever, dot, 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 which means is a shortcut for saying, as ever, it's not black and white, it's somewhere in the middle, right? Um, and in this case, I don't think, in the same way as I don't think that we're going to be destroyed by AI, neither do I think that we are going to reach a utopia. Similarly, do I think it's going to revolutionize the classroom so it's unrecognizable or have absolutely no impact at all? Again, neither. you know, um, and it's clear to us from the work that we've been doing and how much we've been paying attention to progress and literally of the capabilities of the technology, but also how legislation and policy is going. In the States, it's getting a lot easier. There's going to be a runaway train, and the thing is, is a very good case for there's a very good case for removing quite a lot of people from quite a lot of jobs. And I think people, that there's been a bit of a penny drop moment. The most broad one I've seen so far has happened basically since Christmas. And you'll see online with just a simple search dozens of articles about the fact that I went away over Christmas and used Claude Code, and now I can see the future. And there's a lot of that going around, I think, and that in a sense has been sort of inevitable to me for a while. But I also had that experience, and so it does feel quite palpable now. Like where we are on the curve is tricky. As a company, I think we are on the slope of enlightenment. We're definitely not at the plateau of productivity, insofar as we are constantly improving what we do, and we have to, and it's what we've set out to do is to make sure that we continue to use human moderation and engage the opinions of qualified teachers internally and externally in order to keep working on what we're doing and not try and make any money from it or anything like that yet, because obviously we'd like to be able to do what we're doing at scale, and we'll have to do that profitably at some point. But at the moment, we've got good backing to make sure that what we're doing is right, and so we're definitely on the slope on the way up. But there are bits that work really well. And for example, the key stage 2 marking that we've been doing for the longest time, I think it's not hard for us to prove to anybody with the evidence that we have available to us that it marks better than a person at scale. And so obviously that feels like that's working pretty well, and that's true variously for the marking. Less so at the top end. So the Key Stage 4 stuff we're still working on as part of the DFE project we're doing at the moment. But some of the tooling associated with it, the reports and so on, the comments we want them to be best in class, and because of that, again, we're doing a lot of human moderation of them still. But we do intend to get to a point where they scale. So that is our little vignette which shows what it looks like when you're on the way out. We continue to improve, having seen the way that what you need to do to make it work is not just put it straight into a chatbot or do it broad scale, but break it right down into, in our case, hundreds of individual decisions, each of which only asks the AI, hey, look at this sentence. Look at this vast policy document that is the result of tens of thousands of teacher decisions. Does it get a 1, a 0, or a -1? Right? And then we do that lots and lots of times and then build stuff from that, right? So it's a very, very different approach to most people. But we knew we had to do that once we'd plunged into the trough of disillusionment and saw that you can't, without doing that, there's always massive volatility and outliers that are nonsense. It really is. And we're just, generally speaking, nowhere near away. The technology overall is nowhere near being at a place where you won't be going through this if you're not building something different. But yeah, societally, just to kind of finish off that lens, because I think it's the important one, and as a sector, people are beginning to believe. So we've got, we just had this last week, we had the first advisory board meeting of the new recently inaugurated Stylus advisory board. So we've got 8 members so far who are going to be announced over the next couple of weeks. So it's CEOs and directors of education of academy trusts and assessment leads, school improvement leads, and it was obvious that the meeting that we had on Tuesday night was, on the one hand, really interesting. One of the core themes was back to basics, and actually there was that was both in a moving away from what one of the members. I'm sure they wouldn't mind me talking about these things, but I think we Chatham House ruled it, so I can't name them. But one of the members is actually taking computers away from kids, and they're going back to paper and pen, which obviously is sort of music to our ears because we're paper optimized. But it's not really about that. It's about, what is the teacher doing in the classroom? What are you there for? What's your impact? In both the most granular and the most overarching at the same time. It's like, all of this data, and such an important point came back to us. We've got this really exciting way of showing the sentence level data at any scale, so we can say across a group, whatever, potentially even nationally. But we had this feedback of, that's all very well, but no matter how detailed and insightful the data is, if the teachers don't do anything different, it doesn't matter. And that's actually what they're doing anyway in their schools. They're like, what difference do we make? And I'm not talking about just lessons, just teaching. But it's, I guess, in a sense, it's an overarching kind of mastery overhaul of, what difference do we need to make? How are we making that difference? And rather than just getting through a curriculum. And that being the case all over the place. Writing for, not just writing for writing's sake, but really finding writing where it is for every individual student and so on. So that was a really nice message. Now, I feel like that's happening a lot. And it's almost like as opportunities and examples of these broad-reaching technologies increase, I think it almost feels like a reaction of the industry to getting back. I've been feeling the value of handshakes and in-person meetings a lot more recently. And I think that's probably where we're going to go, whether that is a post-truth deepfake thing, or not, I don't know. But certainly, I feel like we are in a really good place for looking into the future and seeing what we want from these technologies rather than chasing a tail of the shiny opportunity. So actually, we're already in a sort of a backlash, and of like, everybody saying AI, basically everyone's saying AI. So I think to characterize it wholly, I think we're in, we're all somewhere either side of the trough of disillusionment. And there are people who are, still strong advocates and powerful voices who maybe are on the way out. I don't know. It's difficult to say. Obviously, there's a lot of people in in a sector. So you have to average that and have really big error bars. But but yeah, I think that's probably where we're going. Certainly, it feels like there's hope for proper systemic change, and but no one's rushing out to buy it, if you know what I mean. It seems to us, and we're in a position, I think, where because we've got something that's really quite different and has cut through, is demonstrably a new approach. We're being seen to be a potential discerning choice. But anyway, with us by the by, I think we're getting somewhere interesting, and in 5 years' time, we may well have classrooms that act quite differently, but we're still going to be people standing in a room teaching a lesson. And that's probably the most important thing to remember, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, I think first off, excellent use of the Chatham House rule. I see it misapplied so often. I think is it Marlborough House is the alternative that wasn't in the international sector or in the international diplomacy. And so yeah, so when I see it in the wild and it's effectively used, I think that's fantastic. But like I think yeah, I mean I listening to your articulation, I feel more positive. But I do think that for every company who's doing its due diligence, there are maybe four or five charlatans or snake oil salespeople who are on the bandwagon because it's the bandwagon. And I don't think we can ever escape that. So probably, I think if you're guiding the way and if people, like Neil and James, when they do their monthly sort of review of the world of artificial intelligence, if the people who are doing the deep thinking can keep us right, then I think your sort of your interpretation is probably going to be closer. But sometimes I despair when I see the emails that I get sent about what people are trying to promote on the podcast or what I see on LinkedIn and stuff. So maybe that just makes me a little bit more skeptical. I don't know. I mean, but the thing is, you have been through this journey, maybe what 2015, maybe a little bit later, and so in part you will have been through I don't want to say the worst of this, but you've seen what it looks like when things don't go because you were ahead of the technology as we established last time. You were ahead of where we are now, and so you were thinking, but the machinery was catching up kind of thing. Do you think that gives you an advantage when it comes to traversing the curve because you've seen what happens when things don't work out the way you want them to? I'm trying to be overly negative because it wasn't a negative experience, but it seems to be going so much better because the technology is in the place that it is now, I think.
I mean, it's worth just saying that there was one specific instance where we still talk about as a team. So Hannah, who's my director of schools, and is really her heart. It's so funny. She now we've just done this new high ability Key Stage 4 curriculum piece, and so she's just done a new set of marking, and she marked it came back on average, the moderators disagreed with the AI at a normal rate to what we're used to at the beginning of a new curriculum. But her line was almost exactly the same as what the AI returned. So I think we've accidentally, copied her mind, which is no bad thing, by the way.
It's like Black
Into
Mirror.
what we're doing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, but she and I still often talk about this. We went out. We really found our trough of disillusionment. We went out a bit too quickly, and we were doing science at the time. So it was before we really pivoted to where we think the real potent benefit's going to be. We'd not talked about the fact that more and more it's becoming obvious that as other areas of the curriculum may change, written English will become more important than ever. And like globally, it's the language of these models and your ability to write in a really granular, the accuracy of it. We know from now vast bodies of literature that tiny changes in word choice change the output of these models really quite dramatically. So, intricate knowledge of written English is going to become increasingly important. And so, yeah, I'm glad that we made that pivot before we even knew that was as true as it is. But we were still working on science anyway. And it was so the thing about I don't know if we covered this when I last met with you, but it's easy once you've got an answer from an AI model to look at what was wrong with it and then change your prompt so the right thing comes out again. But if you do that over and over and over again with lots of different, particularly with lots of different inputs or student work, for instance, then you kind of whittle off the edge cases until really it returns pretty much what you expect it to as the right answer, no matter what you put in as the student work, right? Just in the context of answering a question. But without that improvement cycle, you're always going to have outliers and edge cases that make it go wrong. And in science, because there's 600 testable elements to even just the dual award GCSE, and for each of those, there's at least a dozen sensible questions you'd ask, and half a dozen at minimum iterations of that you'd need to know to make sure that you get the right answer. To have a full body of work that you can question kids on and then have it marked really accurately by AI, as accurately as a person, when a moderated version of that, you have to iteratively improve over hundreds of student answers. Each one of those 600 times 12 times 6 right, and because we didn't really realize that then, because it's so compelling when you do what lots of other, I'm told other providers are available, and when you do what they do, you have what we call a GPT wrapper, right? Where basically you've got, and particularly when they say write your own rubric or whatever, big red flag, by the way, classic, because there's therefore no improvement whatsoever in the way I've just described. So that gets created as a prompt, which then gets given some student work. It goes to an AI model, and then it returns an answer, right? Which is essentially what's happening in all cases, even ours, on a minute level. But if that's all you're doing, that's all you're doing, and you may as well be doing it into ChatGPT. So it's compelling when you first get the scans of a student's work, and it can read them, and they're mostly right when they come out, and you go, okay, we'll do that at scale. And you make a product that takes in lots of scans and then marks the work and then produces a mark sheet, right? So we did that, and we went out and we sold it, and we did it for hundreds of kids. And then we got some, over the next week or so, we had the three heads of science that we were working with sending back a bunch of questions about specific marking points, some of which were like weird, because we had an AI reasoning sentence as well. It's like really weird. And it became obvious quite quickly that actually, if you were asking, because we asked them to be really rigorous with their feedback. So actually, those that are going out there, there may be a lot of stuff flying under the radar right now. And given that we now know what you need to do to improve it to a point where there's many fewer of those, so few that you're comfortable doing it at scale, if you're not doing that improvement, then there's probably a lot. Anyway, that was our trough of disillusionment. We really thought, is it even ready for us now? And so because that happened, and that was quite early on, that was, early 2024, January 2024, that I guess we were sort of ahead in a sense, because we'd already made some of the mistakes it feels like are being made now. And if we hadn't have done that and realized that we needed, to find a tighter, more impactful use case that we could optimize for, and we landed on English, and delighted that we did for the reasons we've just been talking about. And we've been improving on just this small area. In trying to increase scope only as we can, rather than trying to cover a whole curriculum. Because if you are doing that, it is not going to be doing what a person, when they're being as careful as they possibly can, would be doing. So yeah, I think maybe we were ahead of the game, but it's almost lucky. Like lots of stuff, it's not. I'm not going to promise that was planned.
Sure, the best laid plans of mice and men. I'm sure Hannah will be able to finish that sentence off for me. Like in terms of key stage 2, you're saying, listeners may be surprised that your model is more effective than a human. I've never been that big on humans doing this effectively and reliably, so I personally am not surprised. And I think of the thousands and thousands of hours that if a local authority were to adopt this model and just say, here you go, this is what we're going to do, it would save so much time. We could think about those, we could think about inclusion, we could think about the things that are really important in schools. So, I think what's really apparent from our chat is that there are no hard and fast rules or answers. But I've been fascinated listening. If you weren't booked in for a session in 13 minutes, then I'd probably be trying to bend your ear on a few other things. But I know that it won't be long until you and Hannah are back on to talk about how things are going actually with the actual life at Stylus itself. So I suppose all this I have to do is say thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, well, thank you as ever for having me back on. Yeah, love talking to you. I mean, we'll have a great conversation about what's been going on when we've got Hannah back with the Stylus. She said on we had 50 schools join the Stylus family in January as by Hannah's description of it, and I love that. It is feeling like that because we're really close to all the people we're working with. But yeah, we've had a lot of really great feedback recently, and I'll bring along some quotes from your friend and mine, Tim Mills, MBE, who who said a bunch of stuff recently that is I've now got him to agree to being quoted on. Um, and yeah, I'm looking forward to telling you the whole story anyway. I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for having me, Kieran.
No, my pleasure. And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.